Here we are, Scott Wallner back on the channel. How are we doing?
Doing well.
Doing well. We're gonna
Yeah.
start with the picture, eh?
Oh, yeah, that's the right. Dude, it's so good to remind me. I'm immediately like, me too. Okay, like what do we talk about? And just yeah, remember. Okay, so I'm gonna show you a picture. I can't remember. We've talked a couple of times, and shared it with other people. And I think one time I showed you a picture. Um, so I'm gonna show you another picture right now.
For the audio listeners, if you quickly want to pull up the picture on YouTube. If not, I will do a elaborate description of it.
Good point. Okay, so first question I'll ask is, do you recognize this photo? Have you seen this photo before?
I have seen this photo. So what we're looking at is that a lake?
There is a lake there, yes.
Yeah, there is a lake and we got some grass. I think it's a road, the side of a road, and some trees. And I think he showed me a picture of this in winter. And it was a bit of snow and ice. It's true.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So so you're correct. I went back to the same spot that I took that photo to show you last time. Um and you already noticed you have a great memory. Um but yeah, there was snow on the ground in the last picture. Do you notice anything else that has entered the picture that maybe wasn't there?
Yeah, it's like a boat or some,
Okay.
what is
Yeah.
it?
What is it? What is that? There's actually a tube that's going into the lake. They're doing some sort of ecological, engineering to like get water pumped out or something like that. I
Yeah,
honestly don't know.
you
But
should
yeah,
ask
there's this weird like just dirty contraption down there in the water. Um, anything else? There's one other difference. This is like that game where you put two photos side by side and say like what
You got
anything
some,
that's not here, anything that's not here anymore.
was there a rock?
Yes, you have a great memory. There were a few like large rocks, like boulders here.
Yeah.
And those have been taken away, unfortunately.
Uh,
So,
says something about those rocks, no? Like did you do some balancing on it or something?
exactly. Yeah, I used to
Yeah.
run down, or I still do frequently, just like run down to the spot. It's near my house in my neighborhood. And, I look here, I look at the lake here, um, contemplate whether it's beautiful or not. That was
Yeah.
the whole idea last time.
Yeah.
And then there were these big boulders that were sort of placed where you could like jump and do a little like parkour, just like fun jumping around, which is just something I like to do. And so, yeah, this place just like again, I feel like it had such a potential to be really beautiful. And this lake is super beautiful behind here. There's swans and lily pads, and it it truly is like a beautiful spot. But somehow we mess it up.
Mm.
We we ruin it somehow. Um, And so I don't know what this project is, but it doesn't look inviting to me. It doesn't look natural.
Yeah.
Uh, they took away these fun little rocks. I don't know why. Um, but so yeah, it was interesting, and this photo, you can already sort of maybe sense my um, despair about again the potential beauty that is in this place, and then kind of in my mind how we've ruined it a little bit as
Yeah.
human.
Temporarily at least.
So that's something that I've been thinking about um, in terms of developing my own values. So I reached out to you, Lucas, like this time because I've been thinking about values a lot. I saw some of your recent conversations where you were discussing values, and I just wanted to ultimately get to the question of like, hey man, like what are your values? What are you doing these days with your values? I'm
Yeah.
looking like figure out what works in today's world, and I'm interested to hear about that. So that's like maybe a place that we can end.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I just so what do you think about our modern predicament in terms of values? And I'm sort of inviting you again to be a sort of like negative, skeptical,
Yeah.
critic of what we're doing, because I'm just kind of calling for that right now.
Yeah. That sounds good. Well, I had a talk with the Egyptologist, David Falk. Wasn't my favorite conversation because it wasn't very personal. Um, but he had a good point about our modern society, and he said our highest value is comfort, if I remember correctly.
Wow.
Yeah. And so because we were talking about Egypt and I was trying to figure Egypt out and what the mummification and this and that. And they said that Egyptians like they valued the most like having a full stomach. That's why they were so obsessed with the afterlife and like feeding their dead and stuff. It was like the most important thing. And then he called like he spoke about our modern society like that, like his comfort. So yeah, what do you think?
I tend to agree. In yeah, a lot of our well, yeah, and comfort and sort of also along with comfort, like convenience, I think.
Yes, convenience is a good one. Yeah.
Um, we want everything to be right at our fingertips. We want everything to happen instantly. We want it to be really easy. And I'm even just talking about simple things that are a part of our day-to-day habits. That's actually what I've been focused on a lot lately is just like, how are my day-to-day habits? What are the values that are beneath those?
Yeah.
Or am I even really thinking about values when I do my day-to-day habits?
Uh-huh.
Um, and I totally agree. Some of the habits that I think are, well, at least need to be analyzed are some of these habits that try to seek out convenience. Um, and I think we've gone a little bit too far in how convenient things are.
Mm-hmm.
And I worry about convenience because of this idea that, um, so I can't remember, this must have been in Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, the first book. Um, and whatever, Peterson at this point in his career has said lots of things I like and agree with and some things that I don't. So this is just
Yeah.
one thing that really stuck with me from 12 Rules is like, um, do what is meaningful, not what is expedient.
Mm.
So being very um, leery of expediency because with expediency you might lose meaning. And so I think this really does apply generally to this idea of like instant gratification
Yeah.
or convenience. Um, the food that you toss in the microwave and throw on the table for your kids, like I do, is not as meaningful as the meal that I cook that takes time.
Yeah.
Takes time to get the materials, to prepare it, to cook it, to serve it.
Mm.
Um, and I have other examples. Do you see any examples of this sort of like uh, issue with expediency or convenience or comfort?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it permeates our lives, I feel, in the way we work and the way we move. I think um, in terms of relationships nowadays as well, a lot of people have trouble putting in hard work to make things happen lifelong on that long term basis. And one thing that's funny actually in the Netherlands, we have like a massive epidemic of temporary workers. So people get in and out of jobs a lot these days. And I think that's similar to that.
Okay.
You know, it's tied into it.
Yeah, and so they're just sort of jumping into whatever opportunity is there. It's what's quick and easy and not what is
Yeah.
meaningful. Yeah, it's difficult with the modern conundrum of just like practicality and like you have to like work to survive in today's world, which is just a horrible, again, predicament to like be in because yeah, you don't have the freedom to like pick a meaningful job perhaps. But
Mhm.
yeah, things like attention, what comes to mind for me is things like our attention span has been like really affected by this sort of like constant, um, expectation that things are going to happen really quick and we're going to do a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Um, so that's, oh gosh, that's another thing about this trend of expediency and convenience. And again, sort of leading to this overarching value of comfort. Somehow it's like, I would have to think a little bit more clearly about all the different ways that people could find comfort.
Mm.
Um, And so I'm just like going to shift into what makes a little bit more sense to me, which is like look out for the expediency and the convenience.
Yeah.
So our expectation for like communication, right? We expect to, get a text message reply from our family member, almost immediately, or we're like, what's happening? It's been 10 minutes. Why haven't
Yeah.
they replied to me? You know, Not all the time, but sometimes I think everybody in the modern world who engages in this probably experiences that at some point. Or if you spend any time on a computer online or video games, the like slight delay in a loading time. We even have this like common phrase like, "Oh my gosh, this is taking forever.
Yeah.
This is forever." My Netflix is, spinning for 10 seconds. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is taking forever."
Yeah.
Right? That we have this expectation of like our entertainment and our communication to come fast and furious.
Yeah.
Um, And I wonder if that is something that we can try to pull back on. And I know a lot of people have already gone this route with
Mm.
their modern lives, right? Sort of trying to limit the amount of time that they're looking at their black shiny rectangle of any sort, of their scrolling, of their screen time, of their texting and um, all of that. So some people do that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah.
That is a good question of like how is that gonna take hold? Like, does it need to come from people themselves? You know, I think this is a conundrum that a lot of like policymakers are going through. It's like, how are you gonna fix this? Because no, with smoking, for example, it's been very popular to put a tax on it, um, and it's been with some success. But then the question is, okay, what you gonna do about that in terms of leaving it to people themselves. But I am seeing a movement for sure. I might be biased because I've been like more into that part of the internet, and with the people that I have in my life, like I feel that they should act on that consciously. Uh, like I had a lot of like things. I used to only check my texts at night when I just met my wife as well. She knew that like we would only be in communication after 8 p.m., for example. And like I would have my phone on black and white and stuff like that. I'm
Wow.
not as extreme with it now, but it's just it's a relationship you have to create with your devices.
Yeah, and isn't that weird? Isn't that a little bit weird though, that
Yeah.
we actually have come to this point?
Yeah, you
I
have
can't,
to.
I can't like understand how we got here, and I only it's not even like useful to really judge like why or who's to blame or what's to blame. Like it's almost like there's not anything to blame. All
No.
along the way, people have been sort of like trying, and we just have ended up here.
Yeah.
But it is a really strange thing that we do, so to the point that we have to like come up with systems for ourselves to not get trapped by our own little technologies and
Yeah.
entertainment systems and media. It's so interesting. So I have some other examples like
Yeah.
this. It's just sometimes I get caught up in this type of feeling like, wow, what we're doing as a modern society is really kind of strange in many ways. There are many things that we do today that didn't happen 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. You think about Egyptian people often, right? So like their life, their day-to-day habits,
Yeah.
uh, and also later maybe we can talk about like how does this again, like how do I bring this back to like values? Like we have a different set of values today in the modern world, but think about some of the things that are really, really strange about our modern. I guess we could consider ourselves like a global society or like
Yeah.
a species at least. Um, so I have three words that all start coincidentally, just kind of as alliteration. They all start with TR.
Okay.
Okay. Trash, traffic,
Mm.
and treadmills.
Hey.
So these three things I think are so strange that we have found ourselves in a place where we have unfathomable amounts of trash, of just waste, stuff that we are done with, that we've used up and moved on to the next thing. I lived in New York City for a little while, and anyone who lives in New York City, it's great city for many reasons. I had a blast while I lived there. I
Mm-hmm.
would probably live there now, but you literally pile up trash on the side of the road,
Mm.
and there's a lot of people and a lot of it, and it is kind of striking.
Yeah. Yeah, you notice how much it is when they stop picking it up. It happened in Paris recently. Like there was some protests from the workers, and it was crazy. Like within a week, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Even like a mass gathering of people for an event in one short time frame, we can like have an insane amount of trash.
Yeah.
Or even like in places like Mount Everest base camp,
Oh yeah.
there's even trash there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then traffic. Do you guys have traffic in the Netherlands
Yeah.
too?
Yeah. For sure, man. We are like we're so densely populated over here. We get a lot of it. No, it's true.
Isn't it such a strange thing that we put ourselves through with just our what seem like good values and pursuits of like a modern human life and just
Mm.
like productivity and career and family and all of that. We millions of people sit in millions of vehicles, almost at a standstill for hours and hours to travel a relatively short distance, I guess, all over the world. And it's
Yeah.
happening, you could think about it, it's kind of happening constantly 24/7 around the world.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Other animals, other species, they don't have any issues with traffic
No.
or trash either.
Hmm.
And then the final one, which is like again a critique on our modern state, is treadmills. Think about what a strange concept a treadmill is. We will drive ourselves to a building and pay to go run in place.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot that goes into just running. And again, there's not just, a few people with treadmills. People have treadmills in their homes. There are gyms with probably millions of treadmills around the world. I don't know what's the total count of treadmills.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, in all of this critique, what I want to say is the only reason I've thought about any of this is starting with myself and recognizing like the parts of my life that I'm caught up in that don't feel good to me, that I'm trying to work on, that are really challenges. So the only reason I'm like confident in saying this is because I've critiqued myself in these
Yeah.
ways. And
Yeah.
like I've spent plenty of times in gyms. We talked earlier, like I've been a personal trainer, I've gotten on treadmills, I've ritualized my exercise in a number of ways and extreme ways that probably aren't necessary.
Yeah.
So, well, yeah, what do you think about all that? I've got,
Well, it makes me always think about this the nuances and the complexities of our modern life, like how, when some people tell the story of the modern age, it's doom. It's like, what have we done? So it reminds me of the stories we can tell about our state. You've seen Wally, I presume, where,
yeah,
people have trashed the earth so much they go into a spaceship, and comfort out there is really the prime mover, and everyone gets so fat like they can't walk anymore.
yeah.
So that's one story, and then another story is like we lifted ourselves, like we shoulder pressed ourselves out of poverty, and we've made it possible for like billions of people to have a relative amount of wealth, and that's
Mhm.
also amazing. Like, there's such beauty to that. um, so it makes me think of that. All of these examples make me think of those nuances, and then of course it comes back to yourself. How do you deal with that, and how can you try to find a balance?
True.
Yeah.
Yes. Very, very true. Um, and I think like both of those stories that you just mentioned, like Wally, and then like we did this, and many people have benefited from like modernity and progress.
Hmm.
And I think like both are absolutely like true to a certain
Yeah.
extent.
Yeah.
Right. Our intentions could be like productivity to, bring up people who are struggling and living in conditions that they need not live in in the modern world. Um, for sure. And we also can push it way too far, right?
Hmm.
With things like our trash, our traffic, our treadmills. Um, so where is the balance? And I'm finding my way into all of these different talk. I'm getting excited, Lucas, because like I have like all these sticky notes like all over my desk, and
Beautiful.
looking to like try to like jump around and like actually work in some of the things that I've been thinking about
Yeah.
leading up to our conversation.
That's awesome.
So yeah, thanks for letting me come and talk to you again, because exactly what I was hoping would happen is happening. Is like I
Good.
can actually talk to somebody about this stuff. So
Awesome.
um okay. So I've been thinking lately, again, practically in my own life, but trying to connect it to the larger scale as well. It's just like using this very simple and like old metaphor of essentially the cycle of life, right? You could think about an acorn getting into the ground and sprouting and growing into an entire oak tree. And that oak tree grows new acorns, and one of those could fall off and become a new tree, right? So there's a life cycle there. This could have, you could use this with many natural systems. It could be a flower, it could be a fruiting tree, anything like that. Even like a snake losing its skin, or
Yeah.
so many different things have this sort of life cycle. And what I think is common to, or one thing that I pull out of that sort of life cycle story is that for something new to grow, it has to be preceded by a death of some kind, right? There has to be a disconnection and a death in a certain sense in order for something new to grow. Um, I think we're at a point like in our society where we actually can think about like and plan out like what do we want to grow?
Yeah.
Like we've gone so far with things, and we can sort of engineer our lives and our environment and our organizations and societies and technologies like so effectively, that whether we like it or not, or whether we should have this power or not, like we can kind of guide what our future is like. So first I would just like ask people, maybe if anyone that watches this video, like think about like where in that life cycle from like acorn to acorn, where are we in history right now? Where in that sequence from acorn to acorn?
Yeah. Well,
Where are we?
a funny thing I will say about that is that the life cycle seems very natural. And so I'm not sure if we're in the cycle exactly because I'm not
Hmm.
sure how natural we are.
Ooh, okay,
You know what I
okay.
mean?
No, definitely. You're going deeper. Um, okay. Yeah, I
What
mean,
were you gonna say?
no, that's completely true. And I feel like we could talk about that. And I totally agree. We've gone well beyond like the sort of, if you want to put it in a container, like the biological Darwinist like take on the life cycle,
Yeah.
like I said, sort of acorn to acorn.
Hmm.
But what I'm saying is like let's just use that life cycle analogy as a tool, and force ourselves to say, if we are in this larger life cycle,
Hmm.
whether it's sort of a part of us that are branching off into a new, I don't even know what you call it, a dimension when you have technology, it's like some new dimension that we're in.
Yeah.
Um, but like where are we? Are we at the point where like the acorn has already fallen off the tree, and what tree is going to come next is like already past us? Or are we still in the point of like needing to nourish the tree so that we have like a healthy acorn to fall off? Is it like right? Is it about to fall off? Um, do we need to, do we need to prune the tree in a certain sense? Like, are there certain like dead branches that need to like fall off so that the tree is ultimately healthier? Again, now I'm sort of like stretching out the life cycle of the acorn. It's
Yeah,
funny to think about an acorn's purpose. Like maybe an acorn's purpose is to create another acorn.
maybe. I'm not sure.
That's a really weird statement. It comes from this other I forget who like gave this little story that an egg's purpose is to create another egg, or a chicken is just the way an egg makes another egg.
Yeah, yeah.
And so maybe like an oak tree is just the way that an acorn makes another acorn.
Yeah, the oak tree is like, instrumental for the acorn.
Instrumental. Okay, that's an
Yeah.
interesting thing about it. Um, so yeah, I'm just trying to think about, okay, so now practically, like in society as a whole, it's like to me it seems like we have to do some pruning, like something has to die, we have to pull back on certain things in order for something better to come out on the other side. Um, I feel like we're in that stage, and I could be wrong with this, and people can disagree, and like please disagree if you think, but it just feels like to me we're in that stage of like needing the death of some things um, in order to like really emerge with something that's healthy.
Yeah.
Um, I think we're like weighed down by like a lot of baggage
Hmm.
and dead branches, or like we've engineered this crazy oak tree that has so many acorns that none of them are healthy anymore. You
Yeah.
know, we've gone too far with our, bioengineering. I don't know. So yeah, what do you think about things that can sort of like die off at large in society, or maybe in your life personally, or in young family people? Like
Yeah.
you're starting a family. I have a young family. I think there's a lot of people in our age bracket who are sort of in this like, what do I do with my life? What I want to I have a family, I might want to start a family, like, or I have my own pursuits and careers as an adult person. Like, how do I navigate this? The whole like people saying there's a meaning crisis, there's meta crises, there's omni crises. It's like everything is crisis. Um, and I do feel that too. I sort of feel like we're in that state of crisis, and so maybe it's like some things need to die off. Like, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, for a while there, I was convinced that the biggest thing to fix would be the money. Um, that's a big argument from a guest I've had on before. Um, and I can relate that a little bit in saying that currently we are running on a system that doesn't produce before it consumes, let's say. And so a lot of that weight that you feel on top of you, um, there's people that explain that as, okay, we've engineered our money in a way where we can create it out of thin air, and we can support certain businesses that will be alive. And this is some of Vervaeke's argument as well about, zombie um, agency type of thing. Um, it feels like we're in a time where, yeah, some things are alive that should have died off naturally. And so in a normal free market, they would argue a company would die if it's not running efficiently. But now, because we've got all these engineering tools and the money and in the governments, we can keep those alive, and those are like zombie uh, companies. And so their argument is, we fix that up. We make it so that you need to produce before you consume. You either get back on a gold standard as we were before, or something to do with Bitcoin, getting on a Bitcoin reserve standard, where that's money that cannot be created. Um, in that way, you cannot artificially go against nature, let's say. So that's something that I was persuaded by for a while, thinking about the world on that level, like space and time, and and just um, yeah, societally. But the problem I think with that approach a little bit is that it's predicated on stuff. um, as Jonathan Peugeot speaks about, is like because this is close to Ayn Rand's view, for example, who was an objectivist and more conservative, and yeah, someone also spoke about gold and what we've done wrong with the money and all these things. And so what's wrong with that is that it's predicated on stuff, and that if we just fix stuff and if everyone just has enough stuff, everything will be all right. But I think it's like you say, it's a meta crisis, it's a meaning crisis as well. And I'm not sure if it's just going to get fixed when, um, and I don't want to say just in a reductionist way, because I do think fixing this can lead to a fixing of a lot of things. It can lead to like healthier families. And, it's been shown that people that get richer, they care more about the environment and maybe you start living in a more sustainable way. But I don't think it's enough. So I think it starts with yourself. I think it's cleaning up your own heart and, um,
Yeah.
you know,
I do know. I agree. I agree totally. And there are actions that you can take that would benefit you that don't have any or need not have any financial grounding,
yeah,
right? Um,
exactly.
that's actually part of I totally agree that the system of money and then again like how are your like values and resources tied up in that is like a really difficult issue and it's important. Um, one perspective that I take is, or I guess like one thing that I lament is I wish it wasn't so important.
Yeah,
It would be nice if like not that we had to like solve the money problem or whatever the economy problem or the labor economy problem or whatever I don't even know how to tie a bow on that, but like I wish that was less of a thing to even worry about or think about.
yeah,
um that would be nice.
yeah.
um and I think that maybe that's part of the trend that I see as really useful for our modern times, which is to anytime we want to figure out a solution to a problem, you have to step back and say, like, in a certain sense, I'm creating this problem. I'm deciding that this is a problem.
Hmm.
I could ignore it. It could be not a problem in some cases, right? Not every time. Um, but instead of um, finding so many problems to have solutions for, it's just reduce the number of problems that you
Mm.
find
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one.
by simplifying sort of at large.
Yeah,
Um, and I think it fits with that sort of like trend that I'm worried about with the expediency and convenience as well.
right.
Um,
One thing that I would be wondering about is that simplifying, is that something we can still do because we're so complex? Like I sometimes I feel a bit that this whole machine is so well, I'll give you an example. Currently, the basically monopoly train company in the Netherlands that provides all of the train rides um, is reduced. The travel has been reduced by like 6% as to how many people are traveling since the pandemic. Just 6%. Like you would say, it's a small number, but it's causing them to have to up the prices by a bit, by quite a bit, and like it just made me think of the fragility of it all. Like if we don't keep everything up to where everyone is, isn't it just gonna fall apart super quickly? So that's something I'm thinking about.
mhm. Oh man, yeah, that it's scary. It is a little bit scary when you sit with like that realness of it or like you stare into the abyss of it. Um, because yeah, you bring up I think a relevant question and without an easy answer is like, can we actually simplify?
Yeah.
Here's an easy way to simplify my life. Get rid of my email addresses. That personally for me, that would be very easy to do,
Yeah.
right? To pull that off is very technically easy, but I literally couldn't do it. Or I would have to completely rethink a plan to like keep my family alive.
Yeah.
The fact that my family's lives are contingent on me maintaining an email address Like that's another one of those weird human things, right?
Yeah.
That's like and it's just it is what it's where we are right now. I think you can take drastic steps to like build a life that's sort of outside of that. I feel like it's increasingly more difficult. Um, and it's it's interesting. It's a little bit of a shame because again, I don't blame anyone or anything for where we're at, but we've just I think the mindset that we've had to create to get us to this point, we should not continue with that mindset.
Mm.
Um, because we can see where it has led, this sort of like dogged pursuit of productivity and solving problems and um, making things better and better and better, um, instead of taking a different perspective on like how we find that seems to be like the road to success. The path to success is like more problems solved, more things available,
Yeah.
more entertainment for ourselves in a
Yeah.
lot of,
Yeah.
right? More comfort for ourselves. We could instead take a perspective, and this is where I'm going to get to another one of my sticky notes. That's why I'm smiling.
Hmm.
This is so I encountered Thoreau when I was young, like in college, and it was like a very major turning point in my intellectual character because first it was the first time I had really engaged with like reading something that I felt was like truly like meaningful and um at the time in my life it was really sort of perspective changing and so it really stuck with me and his idea of simplifying like the reason that I hold on to that is definitely my influence from like really getting engaged with Thoreau like back in college, which is a long time ago for me now. But Thoreau has this quote, and I sort of like live with this principle in my life, but I did have to like go get the meaning or sorry, the go get the wording again. So I have to read it off my um so he said, for a man is rich in proportion to the number of things which he can let alone. The number of things that he can go without.
Mm. Mm. Okay. Yes. Yes. I
You
see.
are rich in proportion to the things that you don't need
Yeah.
instead of like, how do I fill up my cup to get happy? You know, how many things can I add to my life to reach this, over the rainbow utopia, right? And it always seems like I have to change and add to like get there. Um, but this perspective of Thoreau is like simplify for yourself. You will be more content if you just let things be. Don't
Yeah.
have so many things to focus on. A related quote is like, the man is rich whose pleasures are cheapest, right? It doesn't take a lot for me to get my pleasures, right? It's
Yeah.
easy to be fulfilled. It's easy to be content. It's actually easy to find comfort in that. What you said was like our ultimate social value was this seeking comfort. And I think it's such a dogged pursuit to like engineer a life for yourself that has comfort. All of our comfort is like engineered and seems effortful when we could just pull back. We right? We could leave
Yeah.
things alone.
Yeah. It
We could
actually started to ring. Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, we could actually leave each other alone a little bit too.
Yeah.
You know, why do we have to be all up in each other's business all the time and communicating so much and critiquing so much and looking at each other's lives through the images that we share and the thoughts that we share. Everyone is sharing so much of their life and their thoughts, and we're all just engaging with it. Maybe we just let it go for a little bit,
Yeah.
find some comfort in letting it go. And I think a lot of people have experienced that to some degree. But
Mm.
unfortunately, in the modern world, it's like it only happens in like a small dose, it seems. It's
Yeah.
it's difficult to like maintain that letting go of so many pursuits.
Yeah. Yeah. It's what I started thinking about when we were just at this space of, okay, what can we do in a simplification of things? And I do think I do think it's viable to just learn to live with more quality and less quantity. Like you can really do that. I've really noticed that in my life. Like with very minimal things, get so much joy and meaning. And so, yeah, I think we have enough stuff in a sense. You know, it sounds kind of stupid to say, but I think we really do.
Yeah,
Um,
take
I
that to
I
that
go
to
ahead.
heart. I said, take that to heart. Like we've got enough.
Yeah.
Or okay, well, I'm not going to speak for everyone. I'm going to say for the people caught up in that sort of like modern pursuit. Not everyone is in that case. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to make
Yeah,
clear
yeah,
it's
of
like
course. I don't wanna
not everybody out there has enough. I
no.
recognize.
There are definitely problems with not enough stuff, but I think the point I was kind of trying to make was that we have enough in total. That doesn't mean everyone has a right, and then I don't take that and take the logical conclusion like we need to tax the rich and just I because I don't think that coercion works that well. I just really don't think it's that effective, and I think it's been tried. And so to somehow find a voluntary way to do this, and I think that starts with yourself, as we've been speaking about the simplification. I think to find an inviting way, like this, what we're talking about right now, this thorough way of living. I think if that becomes more of something to invite people to do, um, I think they could be very successful because I think it's true, because I've experienced that for myself. It's like, wow, there is actually uh, so much quality and joy and meaning where there is not a lot of stuff necessarily, not so much more than we need at least. And then I think it can put you in a position of, hey, if I have more, I also want to share more. And actually, when I share more, that makes me feel happy and makes me feel good. But so I do think there's an evil side to this story that I'm telling, and that's exactly the narrative that I'm warning about. Of like, okay, this gives us legitimacy to take away from people, to steal their wealth, and then to even if it's under the guise of giving back to people, but actually, there's usually 15 steps in between where that gets watered to someone else, or you know,
Yeah, I agree. We should always bring up the like second edge of the double-edged sword that
yeah,
is, and even the like Thoreau perspective has, I'd say, if we're looking at a global scale, a sort of dark side, which is I'm removing myself from the
yes,
completely, I'm not contributing. Um, Now, some might say, why do I need to contribute to the larger picture? Like some might say that like complete removal or like being the hermit or, something like that, like that has purpose as well. But there is a dark side if you're thinking about like, well, there's a lot of people that need our help. And if you're not doing anything or you're off on your own, you're not really contributing to helping anyone. And I think helping people is good too. But again, that's where it's the balance. It's like, um, there's some sweet spot or like region or zone of efficiency or I think it's called in engineering safe operating space or something like that. No, I'm botching it.
yeah.
There's something in engineering where they're like the the conditions at which this will operate safely.
Yeah.
um so yeah, I mean, it's also difficult um to again step back even from what seems like a really good intention, which is like to be productive and accomplish a lot, right? It's almost like that traps us into the the place that we are now, right? Again, like I feel like we're at where we are today, not because like uh there were like bad evil intentions all along the way or like at the foundations of it, but just that the pursuit itself sort of gives birth to like the negative consequences that were a little bit sort of unseen or unforeseen.
Mm.
um so uh even just like with my an example with my own children and myself, it's like sometimes I feel like as a good dad, like I want to give them a lot of time, attention and energy to like do things and do things together, even if it's simple like, hey, let's color, let's go do something, hey, let's go play blocks on the floor, let's go do something, let's go outside and jump on the trampoline, let's go for a walk, let's do our little educational book. Like all of these things seem like, yeah, I want to do that for my kid, but maybe I can also, what I think we're lacking is like, hey, let's just sit and chill out for a little bit. We can do that too. Let's just let's just go sit in the sun. Can we sit in the sun for a little bit? Like let's just go stand, let's just go touch this tree for a little bit.
Mm.
And just stay there and be there and practice the ability to like slow down. I feel like I'm wrapping them up in the like, let's do a lot. I want to do a lot today. I want to accomplish a lot. I want to draw a lot of pictures. I want to try do my workbook. I want to do all of these things. And I feel like I'm already perpetuating some of that, like, well, intensity
Yeah.
of life.
Yeah. I'm reading Ian McGilchrist's second book, and he mentions in that book like he lived with, or he spent a bit of time with, I don't know if it was friends of his, on this self-sustaining farm, and he was surprised to learn that it takes like almost 2 or 3 hours max for them in the day that they have to work, and then the rest of the day is like leisure, you know. And then he pulls up the Greeks being like, leisure is what we live for. And that's not in a way of like, I'm going to sit on the couch and eat potato chips all day, but like they would have their work and they wouldn't particularly value it very highly. But then they would value a lot, um, the reading, the philosophy, the conversations, the training of or cultivating wisdom. And And I was like, wow, that's actually really awesome. I'd love to work for 2 hours a day. But yeah, it goes to a deeper point of like, learning to slow down and learning to, yeah. I
Yeah.
think it goes back to values, like we really value work a lot. Um,
Do you think
Possibly,
so?
go
Can I
ahead.
just maybe ask you to clarify that a little bit? Because in a certain sense, I think I agree if you extend on that a little bit.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I will do.
it's like we value hard work with return on that hard work.
Exactly. Sometimes it's instrumental, often it is, you know. We value what the word gets us. We value,
Yeah, yeah,
well, I
yeah,
mean, in
exactly.
a way, we also value this being busy the whole time. This
Exactly.
busyness.
Hyper productivity.
Yeah, I think I know of people that cannot be in silence. It breaks them. Like they cannot imagine what they will do if they don't have their mind occupied with something. So I think in a way we even value the work itself. Um, but yeah,
The same goes even for something that seems on the surface like definitely good is like knowledge.
yeah, yeah.
It's
I
huge.
definitely come to realize that one.
Look at behind me. I'm a knowledge addict,
Yeah,
honestly. It's and again, I don't blame myself for that. It's
no,
just that you get wrapped up in it and you go a little, you get too much momentum and it's going a little bit too far and it's a little bit too intense. Um, so this is where I want to bring up this idea of like intensity in our lives and wondering if what we need to think about is how do we reduce the intensity of our lives,
mm,
honestly.
mm,
It's a little bit different than just going with simplicity or like um dying. It's like it's very hard for, I think, like things to really like die in our lives as habits. It's more about just like making a compromise, and at least that's the place to start. It's like, so how do we just like turn down the intensity on some things?
yeah,
And so for whatever reason, I have these two things that I think like sort of go into intensity. If I were to like make a formula for intensity, I would include at least two terms, two variables, and maybe it would be like two variables that are multiplied together, or like the cross product of vectors or matrices, if you know anything about that. But maybe it's like an exponential relationship. Maybe it's just okay. So what I'm saying is like I don't really care like what the formula is right now. I'm just thinking about it in terms of
yeah,
like we could if we wanted to like make a function of this.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so intensity is all about the frequency and the amplitude. Okay, frequency and amplitude. So, for example, something can be very low intensity because in general it has a low amplitude. Okay. Do you know what I mean by amplitude and frequency? I should not assume that you do.
I think I understand frequency. Can you explain? Well, why don't you explain both of them in case people don't know either?
Yeah. Frequency is like how often it happens. It's
Yeah,
sort of the rate at which it happens. How frequent is it? Right? There's also a physics term, which is sort of like cycles per time.
yeah,
Right. And I guess that kind of makes sense, right? It's like how many times does this happen in some given duration?
yeah,
That is the frequency essentially. And then amplitude is kind of like volume,
yeah,
right? It's kind of like speed. It's like how on a graph, like how tall is it? You know?
yeah,
Uh, so I think intensity is not just about how tall it is, but it's also the frequency. Here's some examples to like trot that out. Something could be low in intensity if it has a low amplitude, right? It's just it's not that it's not that loud, okay? But if that low amplitude, like just think about like a signal like coming through, but then you can equate this to like things in your life. If something is low amplitude, but it's happening really, really frequently, that can become very intense,
yeah,
right? So if even if amplitude is low, at a high frequency, that can become really intense. It's like it's bugging you, right? It's like a
mm,
low frequency thing that's just happening all the time. And over some time, that like really frequent low amplitude thing still becomes intense, right? You sort of recognize the intensity when you have accumulated this whole
yeah.
frequency
When it's
of
the last drop of water,
right?
I really see that. It's a good
Right.
framework actually.
So that's one thing that we have to worry about is that there are some things that seem like low amplitude in our life,
Yeah,
but if they're really, really frequent, we're actually experiencing some intensity.
yeah,
The other example is like something with a really high amplitude. You would think on the face of it, like something with high amplitude is going to be high intensity. And I think in many cases it is. But if that high amplitude is at a really low frequency or not very frequent, it's just happening once in a while, it's not really that intense, right? You just sort of experience this high amplitude and then it's over and you've passed it. So the intensity in a certain sense is it also is wrapped up in recognizing that there's like a temporal context for our lives, right? That things don't happen. We experience a now and a moment, but really we experience our lives on larger time scales.
yeah,
Um, Bringing along our history with us and where we're at right now is sort of based on what we've done in the past, and we bring that along. Like, man, I've been experiencing this low amplitude thing for a while now. I'm getting to the point where it's intense now,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
or, whoa, that was okay, it's over. I'm not feeling like that was intense. It's normal again.
Mm.
Um, so if we're thinking about in our lives, we can incorporate some high amplitude things if they're not very frequent.
And then they're not too intense.
And then it's not too intense. And recognizing that if something is high amplitude, we can feel as if it's not intense if we just recognize that it doesn't happen that often.
Yeah. So what would an example be?
Um, so an example would be, I guess in my own life, let's say like my my daughter goes over and is bugging my her little baby brother
Hmm.
uh, and taking his little toy that he has and just sort of being nasty. And I say, Lily, like don't do that, you
Yeah.
know, don't. um, and I can get very frustrated by that.
Hmm.
And so like frustration is to me like sort of one of these like intense emotions. Like when you experience high intensity, frustration is something that comes out.
Oh yeah, that's
And so
interesting.
for me, that's something that I think is because it's a high amplitude thing for me. It really bothers me that she does that or that she's acting out like that.
Yep.
Um, but what I need to recognize is that it doesn't happen that often, right? She's a great kid. She's sweet as could be, and most of the time she's a joy.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I wouldn't feel so much intense frustration if I just recognize the larger temporal context of this. Hey, this is a high amplitude moment for me. I can't avoid that. In the moment, I like, ugh, like, stop it or whatever. You're gonna hurt him. You don't hit him over the head with the Lego, whatever it is. Um, but I can recognize that it's low frequency and maybe not get so frustrated.
Yeah.
And that's just something I'm trying to do in my life is like not allow myself to get so frustrated. So that's like one very like specific example.
Mhm.
Um, you could also think about well, like training your physical body
Yeah, that's what I
is
was thinking of. Yeah.
is a good example. It's a little bit sort of mechanistic, and so I would say to reach some sort of like something that actually has value in your life or values, you would need to sort of use exercise um, as another analogy for something that's more real. Um, but yeah, as you know, it's like doing doing a bench press at your uh, let's say 50% of your body weight, doing that one time has a high amplitude. It's like you did this particular weight, but if you only do it one time, like it doesn't feel very intense or not very intense for very long, not in a meaningful way. But if you do that over and over, or if you have a really light weight and you do it a lot of times, if you just take a few steps jogging out in your neighborhood, pretty pretty low low intensity.
Yeah.
But if you go and jog for a marathon, it becomes very intense by the end of that marathon.
Mm, I got you.
Accumulate sort of frequency.
Yeah.
Um, so I think in our lives there are so many of our daily habits, um, which I think we actually need to worry most about the frequency.
Yes.
So many of our habits, and this is a place where we could pull back. Um, we have a lot of
Yeah.
control, I think, on the frequency at which we do some of these things. And so we can help ourselves. We can sort of dampen the intensity of our lives by pulling back on the frequency of a lot of daily habits.
Yeah. Reminds me of Gladiator. It's a quote before they are going to battle. General Maximus is like, what we do on earth echoes in eternity or something. And it's this, it's this idea that I try to really integrate of like what you do habitually, let's say, or even in general, what you do in life. If you imagine that, like, high frequency, would it be good for you? Or like, I think a better way of saying it is, well, Peterson had this spoke about this in a talk of like, um, he related it to a passage in the Gospels, but I think it was something about what you store in the heavens is not it's not gold or riches or something, but it has something to do with your actions. Um, and I'm butchering a bit the relaying of it, but I think you get the general gist of it, and it's exactly that.
Oh, absolutely. I think, well, something that I believe, and it's sort of like Petersonian, I guess, is like your actions are the proof of your values.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Yeah.
you can actually you can actually, well, at least you can analyze your values only on your actions. Right? You
Mm.
can't really analyze your thoughts or your beliefs about your values or about someone else. Like, I don't truly know what your values are, Lucas, until I like see what you do.
Yes.
um,
Yeah. You have to study me the whole day, and not just in the podcasting thing.
yeah,
This
but
go ahead.
but in a weird well, in one way I also think about like speech and writing as actions. So it's not but speech is weird because it's so tied to thinking. um
Mm.
would go far. I wonder about how much I would want to consider thinking as an action, as well, like even like really fundamentally, like thinking is an action. Um, but yeah, definitely again, sort of like in our physical output into the world, that's where again, at least we can like see the proof of your values, or maybe at least also analyze, um, are my actions fitting with the values that I want to have or that I believe I have. It allows for that critique when you actually do an action. If it's just all kept up in your head, it's all sort of the theorizing, philosophizing.
Yeah.
Um, so you asked me about an example. I was wondering about you because part again, like really why I want to talk to you, Lucas, and like why I would talk to anyone else is to literally talk out some of these practical applications and really learn about what are the things that I can do. Again, like how do I prove my values here?
Yes.
Right? Part of that is thinking about it, part of that is discussing it,
Mm-hmm.
thinking about it with someone else,
Yeah.
and then actually doing some things. And so the sharing of thinking or sharing of your experiences, like is something that I really want to do more to help myself,
Yeah.
honestly,
Yeah. Yeah.
and my family. So like what are some examples of things that you feel like are maybe like too frequent that you could like lower the intensity by lowering the frequency?
Definitely just being on the phone without purpose. So I spoke about this with my wife recently of like I have the intention to not use my phone without knowing what I want to do with it, you know, because I think if you don't use it as a tool, you become used yourself by it, you know, like the algorithm. Um,
Mhm.
so that's definitely something where I'm doing it. Like, I realize, you know, this adds up, this stuff. But funny,
Yeah.
I was in the car a bit more the other day. I don't have a car myself, but because I was staying somewhere else, I was using that car, and I don't drive a lot. So every time I was driving away, I would wait with putting my seatbelt on, and I was thinking, if I don't put my seatbelt on now and not this ride, I will probably be a bit more lenient the next time and the next time. And so I was
Mm,
thinking, I'm just imagining if I don't put on my seatbelt now, that I will never do it in the next thousand times. And then the chances that I die become like increasingly higher. And it's stupid not to do it now. So I do think about my life in that way a lot. So it's funny you pull up this intensity framework because I do. Yeah, they make me not do a lot of things like playing video games, for example. I don't want to open that door again because I've seen how that accumulates as well. Um,
right.
yeah.
Mm,
So I think it's actually more often about not doing things, you know, not doing the
right.
things that you know are not good for you.
Right. It doesn't that feel like the modern predicament? Like that's not all like again, not always the case, but it does sort of feel that way. And that's like exactly what Thoreau said. It's like you're gonna find happiness like with what you can go without.
Yes.
What you can go without. Um, even I mean, I think that applies to the way that we eat food, right? Like again, for a lot of people, some people really struggle with eating enough food and having food to eat and all of that. I'm talking about myself. I'm caught up in this challenge, and I
Yeah.
think other people out there in that challenge too. Like how much you eat and how frequently you eat. It's just snacking and having little drinks. And for me, like as an athlete type person, it's like whatever. It's like a protein bar, or like a protein shake, or coffee, or a this, a that. It's like, oh my God, how many things do I need just to like feel comfortable in my day again? Right?
Yeah.
Like if I don't have those habitual things, like I feel that discomfort, which, as you said before, is like the scariest thing for us these days is to like be uncomfortable kind of. We put so much effort into maintaining our comfort.
Yeah.
Um, oh, so maybe it's like maybe we're never going to get rid of that like maintain comfort drive. But again, it's like how easily can you be comforted? You know?
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot for you to be comforted. Here's an example. I think about like putting my kids to bed. Okay. And like the more things that I add to like the ritual of getting them to go to bed, I'm worried about that because it's like if they don't get one of those things in this chain of like,
Yeah.
we brush our teeth, we do our story time, we get on our jammies, we rub your back, we talk about your day, we do our little bedtime routine, right? And I'm like, this, I'm doing this out of the purpose of I think it's going to get them to go to bed. We need this to happen for our own sanity, for their health. They need to go to sleep, you know. But man, I wish it were just simple.
Yeah.
Um, it's also like this principle of like least necessary force, I think, too,
Hmm.
when we we try to solve problems and we don't sort of restrain ourselves from how many things can I do to solve this problem instead of like what's the least I can do to solve this problem, and I might have to just try that out and be patient. um Even though I see like I might have to do 10 things to
Yeah,
solve.
you could do a lot more.
I could do more. I already see the path to like solving the problem by these 10 steps, or these 10 requirements that I need to to meet. Um, but yeah, what if I had less requirements to like get an acceptable solution?
Yeah.
Uh, this sort of like overcomplicating.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think we do a lot of that.
yeah.
But I think it's actually comforting that I found it really comforting, the idea that discomfort is not a bad thing, you know? Like I found that to be quite a revelation in my life and it become quite addicted to it. Because I know the only way, like for example, that we had this chat scheduled, it's really good for me. Because if I have a day off and I don't have work and I hit the gym in the morning, which I did, then very often the date goes to waste. So I want to have something on the calendar. Uh, and you're so relaxed and then you know you have something to do. And for example, my wife as well, she's going to have a dinner with friends and she's kind of like, I really don't feel like this right now, but I know it's better for me. So it's this idea of recognizing that there's things that are beyond your expedience, like your instant gratification, that actually pull you forward. And I think
Mm,
similarly about work to um, a limited degree, of course, because sometimes people take it too far. But I have a great friend of mine who does so much better when he has a job. Like he didn't have a job for a bit and it just wrecked him, you know?
mm,
So it's this choosing what you're bound to, and your habits reflect that and your daily patterns reflect that. And I think if your values are expressed in your actions, then it's wise um to take actions on a habitual basis that help you forward. And so that is what I hope to do. And yeah, that's why we're here.
yeah, I think so. It's it's fun to really think about it, and then go out and do it in your life. Like it does actually like get me excited to like be positive and motivated to like really give it a try, um and see if it works. Maybe that's because like maybe you feel this in your own life. It's like there is always a sense of like it's not quite where I want it to be.
Yeah.
um, and that feels true. Like there really is some sort of like better state that I can get myself and my family and my community in. Because like you can't extend like starting with yourself and then into your family, direct family, and then larger community and then larger communities. Like you can make an influence like on all of those different levels. um it's it's motivating to just try.
Yeah.
I guess that's all I can really say about that.
Uh-huh.
Um, I have another I have a different sticky note here.
Yeah.
I feel I feel like I took us into a dead end with this
Well,
last
I'll
piece.
say one more thing. I'll say one more thing about it
Yeah,
before
yeah.
we
That's
continue
fine.
the next one. Is that so I told you I'm applying for a job and then I had to do a personality test for it. And they ask you a bunch of questions and they're often work related. And then while I was answering the questions, I was like, okay, I'm not sure if I'm answering these reflecting who I am or the person who I want to be, or then the person who I'm afraid to be. So and I
Hmm.
think a lot of these values types of things are extremely complicated because we are not just one thing. Uh, like I had a conversation about this recently, an exchange about um, good and bad. What is good and bad?
Mm.
And this is one of those Bitcoiner people, and so he said that what is good protects life, liberty, and property, or whatever uh, I want, or something like that. And I was like, well, it's not obvious what you want. Do you want what your lower parts want, or do you want, what your ideal self wants? So
Mm.
I think that that adds a layer of complexity that is very real to this conversation of values.
Oh, very true. And we're always, not only are we not the best judge of ourselves, we're often probably terrible judges of ourselves,
Yeah.
right? Like we don't always have a very clear or honest take on ourselves. Um, it's so yeah, how do you know what the real impetus is for the values that you feel like you have?
Yeah.
Uh, that's where the actions do help. You can be a little bit more objective
Yeah.
about like, hey, I took this action and such happened. And I had a good outcome that aligns with my values, or I didn't, or,
Yeah.
I can back and see if I handled it well or if I didn't handle it well. Um, I totally agree. Um, yeah, there's this idea too. Have you heard of like the idea of like a daimon,
Yes.
like related to the word demon, but
Mm-hmm.
not demon? I think it probably goes. I don't know. I heard it through Bernardo Kastrup. If you know him, he's like a
Yes.
guy from the Netherlands.
Yes.
He has spoken about it. I'm pretty sure he's written a book about it. But it's also like recognizing that there is this part of ourselves that is like beyond what we want.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's gonna move through us because we have a body and we are a part of nature and we came from nature and we're still within nature and acting on it and reacting to it. And there's a part of ourselves that is that, right? Like you wouldn't like blame a tree for growing in the wrong direction, right? Like you
Yeah.
wouldn't like blame um you know a fox for hunting a rabbit,
Yeah.
right? And so there are certain things that we do that we shouldn't necessarily like blame ourselves for, right? It's just like there's the daimon and it has its will, it has its impulses, and those are going to sort of like work through us whether we like it or not.
Yes.
And it doesn't care about what we want or what we think our values are or what they should be, right? There's this sort of like impersonal. I think that's what Bernardo Castrop, like he actually characterizes it as the impersonal like side of our being or self. Um, and so that plays into like that's a piece of our analysis of our own values or our development of our own values.
Yeah.
Uh, so okay, this brings me to like my last sticky note, which is, dude, how do we figure out what our values are
Yeah.
or what they should be? And then like
Mm-hmm.
I'm serious, like in a joking way, I'm like, Lucas, dude, what are your values, bro? Like, tell me. How
I
do you
well.
I'm trying to figure out what mine should be or like
Mm,
what my family should work toward or move towards in terms of like embodying our values and acting them out.
yeah.
And I just don't feel like I have all the answers.
No, I don't either for sure. I will say that usually you can tell. Well, let's start with this. We're speaking about actions and values as well, how your actions can reflect your values. I think that's a good place to start because actions are they're concrete, so we can talk about them.
Sure.
I don't know about all the values out there, but I know about my actions and I know which actions I take, and I can see how they reflect my character and my values. And I think I can tell when I'm doing something wrong.
Mm,
So this diamond thing, I'm not sure if Socrates had this, but I'm reading Plato again right now, and I know that he refers to something like but he has something that stops him. Um, that's usually how it's active. Sometimes it pulls him to something, but usually it stops him from doing something. You know?
Yeah, right, right. I can see. Yeah, it has that sort of it can push you towards something or it can pull you away from something.
Yeah, yeah. So I have
That's
that
that
very
force.
strongly.
That's that force in general. Yeah.
Exactly. And that works in my life a lot. I know exactly if I'm doing something wrong that it's wrong. And I feel the pull as well when there's a potential beautiful thing that I can do. But it's a little bit uncomfortable to me, but then I do it anyway, you know? Whether that's like buying flowers or whether that's like cleaning something up that I know I should have cleaned up, or whether it's introducing myself or the other day. So last week I spent some time at my parents' place because they're out on vacation, and I went to my old gym. And I saw an old friend of mine I hadn't seen in like 5 years. And at first I was like, I don't feel like really, going into conversations. It's a bit awkward, this and that. And then it was like my last day, and I saw him there, and I was like, oh. But I knew it was good for me, and that part of me was like, you have to go talk to him. It's actually really nice and this and that. But there was just this little discomfort about it. And we had a great talk, and it was great, and it was awesome, and it was like great catching up, and it was a really positive conversation. So I hope that my values are the highest values, the parts of myself that act in the right way. And this becomes tricky because I think there's dangers to what I'm about to say. In one way I want to say I don't think there's a right way. In another way I want to say there is the good. I do believe there is the good. I think goodness is something on itself, but we are inherently um like transjective in Vervaeke's language. Like we engage with the world and the world engages with us. And so I think our values might be similar because we are so entrenched in them,
Yes.
you know?
They are a
That's
part of.
yes, yes, exactly. And so there's some variation to that, although I think there's a fixed aspect to goodness itself. But I know goodness when I see it. And um so yeah, I'm not sure what my values are. Someone would have to tell it for me and study me for a while, but I really try to act in the best way possible. And I fall short of that, of course.
Interesting. Yeah. Um, right. So I totally agree that approaching this question and answering it for one's self is really difficult.
Yeah.
Um, so I I realized later that this has another connection to Thoreau in a little way. I just
Okay.
realized that today, kind of when I finally realized like how Thoreau fit into what I've been thinking about lately in terms of like the values and the dying off and the trash and the treadmills and the traffic and all of that stuff and the intensity and the frequency and amplitude, blah blah. Okay. So before I brought Thoreau in, um, I had this concept of depth. Okay. I'm thinking about this. There's depth to things that are meaningful, there's depth to our values. Okay. And I, without going into it, can you make any connection? Like, because in a certain way, it's like the word depth and values, it seems like those are in sort of like different realms,
Yeah.
right? Where I'm thinking literally like depth finding, like how deep is something?
Yeah.
When I think about values, it's not a physical thing that really has depth. Um, so it might seem a little bit weird to use a concept of depth or depth finding
Mm-hmm.
with something like values, but that's really what I have been doing recently.
Yeah.
Um, I'm influenced a little bit by some of the actually like prior research that I was engaged in grad school, where I was studying perception and um, was interested in, um, well, essentially like how we put together our perceptions and what do we take away from them. But this idea of sort of like depth and focus and granularity, um, those were things that I was interested in figuring out how that works in perception. But I think it works with our values. Okay. So what I'm suggesting is that any given value has depth, and the depth is essentially um, stacked up by all of the things that are associated with that value, or that sort of that value is built off of, or just are related to that value. So how do I go through a process of finding the right depth for my value? That's what I'm thinking about.
Mm.
Um, okay, so now I'll bring up the imagery. You're standing at the edge of a pond, and what you see in front of you is really just the surface, right? You see the surface level of the pond. You feel like you see under the surface, but really what you see is a sort of projection of what's under the surface on the surface. I don't want to go into like how this is related to like the holographic principle and information theory and things like that. But as a sort of physical analogy, it actually does sort of work, where it's just like what's under there, I kind of see, but I'm seeing it on the surface. I'm not really seeing down in there. To go down and see what in the depths to see actually how deep it is, I
Mhm.
actually have to go in, break the surface, and go down and sort of observe or take a measurement or experiment with like how deep is this?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Up above the surface, I'm sort of in my land of comfort. I'm breathing air. Right? I'm sort of acting in a way that is not interrupting my values or like my understanding of my values because I'm doing it already. But when I go in and break the surface, I'm now in a new place that I can't just survive in. I can't breathe the water.
Yeah.
I'm not comfortable underwater or especially in really deep water. I become sort of like increasingly uncomfortable
Yeah.
as I go deeper and deeper. Um, and so I'm saying that we can sort of explore our values in the same way that we might like dive into a lake and go into the depths. That's as far as I really want to take the imagery, but I what I think is like the imagery helps you say, okay, here's this value that I have. I could like name one. It's like I want to take care of my kids. Okay, that just comes up. Okay, that's a value that I have, but that is the surface level. Okay. It's what I immediately see. When I look at it, I'm breathing air. I understand it, but there's a lot baked into that value, right? There's some depth to that value. Um, what does it really mean to take care of, right? I can't really get a good assessment of that by just looking at that value and say like, yeah, here I am. I'm just going to take care of my kids. It's like, no, I have to feed them. I have to make sure that they get adequate sleep. I have to make sure that they're engaged on a psychological level, on an emotional level, that they feel secure, that they're literally protected. Like all of these things are baked into the surface level, take care of my kids, right? Um, so the next step is how deep do I go? What is the right depth for me to put into my practical life for a value like take care of my kids? Or I don't know, we could list a number of other sort of like surface level values that we have. And then we can try to break it down. And I think like the deeper that we go into it, we start to get a little bit more precise about um, what we can do in our lives and understanding why we have that value or what it actually is. Sort
Yeah.
of like understanding what it is helps me figure out what I actually need to do in my life.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that's good.
so I don't know what you think about that sort of like how do we like find the right depth of our values? Like is that I haven't shared this framework this
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
not even a framework. You know what I mean? Like I haven't like written a book or anything or like really developed this idea. It's just something that like I'm thinking about in my own life.
Yes.
Um, the analogy and the imagery just literally came up to me. It's not like I came up with that imagery as a
No,
story for you or something that I want to write in a blog post or anything. It's just
yeah,
like this has helped me think about it. I don't know. Does it make any sense?
it makes sense. I'm just not fully understanding it, and I'll ask a question about it to understand it better. Is that you're trying to discover how deep your values are? Is that what you're trying, like when you say taking care of my kids, do you want to discover like how deep that goes until the bottom of the pond, let's say, or are you trying to figure out how deep some values should be? So yeah, how do you think about that?
Yes, and I would say, um, like many other things in life, we should try out a lot of different strategies.
Yeah,
It should be a sort of ongoing living experiment, right? It's that more so, I guess, not do I want to find what is the deepest point? Maybe that will be useful to find out what the deepest point is. But again, maybe I want to find out like what's the most practical depth to like put into my life.
yeah,
Um, So yeah, in a certain sense, it's like, hey, try it out. You tell me, like, or it depends. It's sort of that thing where it's a real practice of like, I'm gonna have to dive in a bunch of times. I'm gonna have to break the surface more than once.
mm,
That's really where you sort of like accumulate maybe the wisdom or the understanding is by like making multiple attempts at exploring the depths of
yeah,
it. Um, and then also, when I go and explore the depth, as a metaphor, as an analogy, I go down, I do learn something about what's under the surface, even if it's just a little bit that I learn with that one dive and sort of like
yeah,
ex experiment. Um, it's like I bring that back up to the surface, right? And if I hadn't have gone down there, there was no chance for me to like bring that up to the surface. So it's this idea that you kind of like you have to go there to then bring it back.
yeah,
And again, put it something into practice.
yeah. So I guess you're learning a lot by reaching into the depths of your values. Like, oh, there's something I can bring to my conscious level that I didn't know was there.
For sure. And maybe
Yeah.
in some cases it's like going down super deep and like finding the deepest point, like you suggested, is not something that you want to do that often.
Mm,
Like thinking about your own, some of your values are related to just like your mortality or your recognition of your mortality. Um, and understanding like that super deep place, ugh, like how many times do I want to really go down there? I don't know. People will have differing opinions of that. Again, I guess it depends on the value. And maybe like weirdly like maybe the deepest point of like all our values is something to do with morality or mortality, not morality,
yes.
mortality, right? Maybe there's a common sort of deepest point to like all of the values that we have,
Mm,
and that's like tied somewhere to mortality or the life cycle of the universe. um yeah, and maybe depth, the other reason that I like depth is because well, you know about fractals, right? So I think depth is actually a really, to me, a concept that I visualize with fractals, like
mm,
fractal zooming, like you can actually go into the depths of a fractal. Right? It's often like a three-dimensional sort of, or uh it can be represented in like a three-dimensional sort of space,
yeah.
even though a fractal is often uh not at whole number dimensions. I don't know if you know that about fractals, but like there's a measurement of what's called fractal dimension.
Uh-huh.
And it can be somewhere between like one dimensional and two dimensional, or
Oh,
two
that's super
dimensional,
interesting.
two dimensional and three dimensional.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, here's an example of just like how this works. It'll make sense. It's like, okay, you take a line. Do you know how the Coke snowflake is created? This is like a very basic fractal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So you start with like a line, right? Which is just like one dimensional. And if you sort of like break it so that you create a little triangle in between that little line segment, um, then you repeat that process. And on each of those new little line segments, you sort of like break it and bump it out.
Ah.
If you've never seen an image, I guess let me
It's
show my
so
screen.
interesting. Yeah, I can imagine. I'm starting to
Um,
see it.
or yeah, you can look at the image yourself on your own computer.
Hey,
Um,
all good. If you pull it up, we can share it.
okay, I will.
People can see it too.
I will always take a chance to like share a fractal. So you can this example so yeah, there's the Coke snowflake and then there's the
Yeah,
something it's called something else, the line one, Coke curve. Okay, here's the
Coker.
that I was thinking about. It's like you take a line segment and you sort of break it and bump out this triangle. Now you
Yes.
want to create four line segments, and now you bump it out with a triangle again, right? And again and again and again and again, and you can do this to infinity. And what's going to happen is there's going to be so much sort of bumping out and expanding on a small scale. Just each one-dimensional line segment sort of bumps out, but eventually it can fill the entire two-dimensional space, right? And so there's actually this transition that happens over time as you like iterate this fractal from one dimensionality, a line, into like essentially covering a two-dimensional space. It never really becomes totally two-dimensional until you like go to like some limit. But with this one, I think there's actually like no real like limit on the end of it.
Yeah.
So you can see that like fractals, this Coke curve or this Coke snowflake, it's not one dimensional, it's not two dimensional. Um, it has this fractal dimension that are not whole numbers, which is really
Mm.
interesting. And like the Mandelbrot, if you do these fractal zooms, it's like you're looking at something that kind of appears as three-dimensional, but it's sort of like two-dimensional surfaces the whole time. It's it's one of those strange things about fractals. Um, but I like to think about depth in terms of exploring sort of the fractal zoom in
Yeah.
that way, um, where yeah, you're seeing something more by like going into it
Mm-hmm.
instead
Mm-hmm.
of just viewing it sort of passively from the surface
Yeah.
level.
Do you have fear in that? Is there fear or discomfort involved in doing that? Or is it just joyous for you?
I think there can be fear for sure. Um, because as I said, I think some of those deep places, um, spending time there well, I mean, it can change your mood really
Yeah.
and be sort of really intense, I guess. Maybe the
Yeah.
amplitude on that is like so intense that you don't want to be there very frequently.
Yeah.
Um, So, yeah, and again, it's like, is that practical? Is the like knowledge of the deepest part the practical part, or do I sort of least necessary force? Like, or can I
Mm.
leave that alone? Like Thoreau said, like, can I leave that like super deep place alone? Can I just go not quite as deep? And that sort of does it for me in my life, right?
Mm. Mm.
Not like ignoring the fact that like there's something deeper there, but going a little bit deep to bring it back up. It's also think about bringing back, if something is super deep, it requires a lot of time in order to bring it back to the surface,
Yes.
right? And if bringing it back to the surface is like where we bring our action out and we give it a try and we bring it into our lives and like have it impact and influence the world at large, it's like, well, you got to devote a lot of time and energy to go really, really deep. Um, and maybe you aren't even able to bring it back up
Yeah.
because
Can you
you're
concretize that? So can you give an example of going deep into one and then bringing it up to the surface so that I understand fully and then
um,
implement because you're saying and you're putting it into action then. So what how would that look?
okay. So, thinking about a value, um, I want to be healthy. I want my
Mhm.
body to be healthy. This is
Yeah.
something I value. The super deep end of that is sort of knowing on a really granular basis every single little thing that I need to put into my body at what time, knowing all of my biological systems and the specificities and details of how my systems are working together, because that's what I really am. Deep down, I'm a stomach and a liver and a kidney and lungs and a heart.
Yes.
Do
Okay.
I need to have that depth of knowledge
Mm.
in order to be healthy?
Yeah.
No, 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 I don't. Or maybe I just have to be aware of it. I don't need to dive down there every day or every meal, understanding like what is, monitoring my heart rate at every meal. Like personally, I don't need to do that. Um, Maybe I just need to dip under the surface a little bit and say, I know that there's this place where I feel bad because I've eaten too much.
Hmm.
This is a less deep knowledge of sort of the health of my gut, and my energy system and my metabolism. It's less deep, right? And so that for that value, that's the proper value. And so how do I simplify for myself and not say I need to take these 10 supplements at 8 in the morning and have my workout precisely 30 minutes after my coffee and have my, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, there's a certain level that's appropriate. There's a certain level of force, least necessary force. Like there's a certain level of force that I need to live out my value of have a healthy body or something like that, um to make it work, to
Yeah.
be comfortable, to be content, and
Yeah.
like in Thoreau's sense to like just have enough. I don't i don't need to have the perfect blood chemistry 24/7 to feel healthy. And if
Hmm.
I'm focused on that, like I'm limited in resources and like I can only be underwater so long focused on the health of my body. I have all of these other values that I need to address too, and I have to take actions on those values.
Yeah.
I have a limited amount of time in a day that I can take actions. That means like I have a limited amount of time in a day that I can live out my values. Um, Going super deep on my gut health or blood chemistry, um, maybe isn't really worth it. Maybe
Yeah.
it is that time and
Okay.
energy.
Yeah, maybe that's not the wisest thing to do or the wisest way to spend your time. And I think I'm understanding um yeah, the way you're applying it. And then I would say to that, maybe it's useful to go into the depths um every once in a while or when you get started with something, like with the health for sure. Like it makes sense to like do a deep dive, as they would say, when you get into things, and then simplify, simplify, simplify until it's, almost habitual. And I think similar things hold true for other values, one could say. And then I think you could even do a meta thing where you try to figure out what's below all of these, I don't know what you call it, like streams. And then I think you can really understand, and that's also something that should not be done every day, but to evaluate that for yourself.
Mm. Exactly. You brought up something that I thought about with this concept, which is exactly, it's like, all right, how do I in this like meta level like develop the best strategy for depth finding?
Yes.
Right? There's like the act and the practice of like going down and bringing it to the
Yeah.
surface. And then there's the like, how do I optimize my efforts in depth finding? Can I come up with a pattern? Can I develop a habit? Right. And that's where I think you're absolutely right. Like you got to go down to the depths. You can't ignore what's there. You learn from going down there. But if you go down there to learn, you're not learning from the other depths, right? There
Yeah.
is this like sort of like inherent limit of like we can't know everything all the time all at once. Um, we have to just like go for the experiment and do it. And yeah, every time we sort of like bring back something to the surface, we learn more about the totality of the depths.
Yeah.
So yeah, but so one thing is like, oh shoot, I just dropped my I dropped my pen, sorry. I don't know yet. I haven't had enough time or enough practice with this concept of like going deep and bringing it back to the surface to know if it really works. It's literally something that I've been thinking about lately as like, can this help me figure out how to bring my values out more in the world and maybe come up with this meta strategy of like figuring out the best values. Um, and so it might be the case that it's really not a good imagery or not or a very limited sort of metaphor for us. I would maybe like ask you like, hey, offline, like try it out for a week, try to like think about some of your values in this way and like come back to me and be like, it worked or like, it didn't really work.
Well, then I
Um,
would ask you this question. how would I now, if I come out of this, apply it? So what would I do, and with what values, for example? Because first I thought that what you meant was with the depth, like becoming healthy or whatever, for example, is trying to figure out what's below that, like why uh, do I want that, or like what's the motivation. But now what you're explaining to me is that it's more like, okay, the depths to which you want to understand that
Mm.
value as to how it works, functionally.
That's very interesting. I think what you suggested um, is also really important. Um, so, for example, like with the getting healthy thing, the why, it's right. Like, yeah, the why is deeper. So maybe the why, and you should go explore it, right? Like
Hmm.
you should figure out why you want to be healthy. Like, is it just sort of like egotistical aesthetics? Like maybe by going deep down there and figuring that out, like yeah, the real reason that I want to like be healthy is to look good. And
Yeah,
then you can decide for yourself if that's okay for you. Can be. I don't see any total problem with that. Or it could be like, oh wow, yeah, this is something like maybe I want to pull back on. Um, or yeah, maybe you discover, I don't know, it could be something good that you discover in that why as well, which is like, there's a reason I'm afraid of not being healthy. Um, and maybe understanding the why and bringing that back to the surface can help us with motivation, right? It can give purpose. I think you're tapped into like that purpose level, and maybe what would help us act our values out more is also this sort of like this motivation and purpose. If we have more motivation and more purpose, we're more likely to like do those actions. So, yeah, the depth of a given particular value does have practical things that we can pull to the surface. It does have um I don't know what the category of like the why question is, or
yeah,
like
yeah, I understand.
so we can also pull that out.
Yeah,
Um so yeah,
yeah, I'd be happy to try that.
it's a very general sort of image for us to use as a metaphor. And so other people might be thinking about, oh, this is what it means to go deep and bring it back to the surface. Would love to hear about that. I
Yeah.
personally like love to hear about that. Um, so yeah,
No, so I think I'm already exploring that to a degree, but I will use this framework more because I'm just thinking about. I always analyze the actions I take. Like I think about my motivations all the time to check myself in a sense. Like, okay, is this motivated really out of trying to be better, trying to be wise, um, or is there something lower going on? You know. So that's
yes. And as a friend, right? I might also tell you, hey, remember that you're devoting time and energy to those particular depths that you're exploring. Don't forget, you don't always have to go that deep.
yes, yes, yes.
Are
That
you going that deep too often? Is that holding you back a little bit? So again, answer unknown. That's mysterious and confusing and difficult to figure out. Is
the
like
question is good.
that's part of the thing is like I don't know how deep to go. I don't know how often to go that deep.
Yeah.
That's what feels uncertain to me personally.
Mm,
Um, just with the knowledge that there is some depth. Again, like that's like my suggestion. Maybe people disagree that there is depth to our values that we
yes.
can explore and sort of like abstract out or categorize or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, so it would be good to have some sort of accountability mechanism with this, though. Like what you're saying immediately, I'm like, oh, this could become a pitfall of mine, over analyzing. But I think that coming back to action, we do know what's good often. I think I think a lot of people do have that, and so I think you might figure that out for yourself as well. Or someone will tell you, like you just warned me. Um, but yeah, in general, I think we don't spend enough time about on our minds and figuring out our motivations and our values. So I do think that an analysis can also help not only yourself, but it can help you see it in other people, and if you love them, and if you can bring it to them with kindness and compassion,
Yeah,
you can help them as well.
absolutely. That's really beautiful. Um, I'm wondering if like, okay, so earlier I talked about um, sort of controlling the frequency at which we do things. And so this also applies to the analysis that we're talking about, right? The analysis of our values. So like one could say, I'm going to set aside as just another practice in my day time, like 30 minutes at the end of my night to like go deep and
Yeah,
come to the surface, right? That's like one strategy that I could see people putting in place where, as you said, it's like it's an accountability mechanism because we can very like clearly control like, okay, I'm gonna try to do this once a week, like my Wednesday night, I'm gonna do it. Or I'm gonna try to do it once per day in the morning when I wake up. Like that's one strategy. The other like strategy for this is like how quickly can I dive and bring it to the surface like in real time? Like or do I know where to go? That's the other thing. It's like if I'm gonna have to bring it up to the surface, it's like how quickly can I apply the right depth in a
yeah,
given situation? And getting a little bit better at that being your natural habit, right? So it's like yeah, you can actually like kind of change your habits by in the moment trying out something new. That's
yeah.
how you can change your habits. But yeah, it's a tough thing. And we should you don't want to get caught up in it all the time either, right?
Hmm.
Like you'll drown. You
Yeah, I
spend
would almost say like this could be a once in a couple months type of thing. You
once
know,
I think couple months. Hmm.
that's uh that's at least how I think about like deep reflection as well. Because I think deep reflection is good as opposed to like um surface level reflection on a higher frequency, simply because sometimes your changes are so small throughout your weeks that the constant reflection might not give you that much information. But when you give some time in between, like I find that I have so much clarity about myself 2 years ago, but like none about myself now. Um, I get that more from people around me, you know?
Say more about that.
Well, let's say understanding who I was 2 years ago and the motivations I had and the path I was taking seems quite obvious to me in retrospect with the actions that I was taking. Um, but in a moment, I find it hard to see exactly who I am. Um, and time helps that, and the people around you help that. But reflection is like that a little bit. And if you reflect all the time on yourself, then you might just the reference points might be too close to each other to really, notice the direction you're going into. It's like, analyzing a stock chart every day. It doesn't teach you that much, but if you analyze 20 years, hey, we got some patterns, maybe.
Absolutely. This reminds me. Do you want to keep talking for a while?
I have time. It's up to you. You have children.
Yeah. No, I've got some time set aside today, so
Okay,
fortunately.
good.
This reminds me of something else that I was thinking about in again this like sort of like modern predicament in my own life and like pulling back on things and simplifying and um so one thing is this concept of like overfitting. Do you know what like overfitting is in terms of like a computer science sort of concept?
No,
So, okay. So one thing you can do in computer science or with algorithms or creating you essentially you can create models based off of discrete data points, right? So you have a bunch of data points that are different from one another. They're not all the same thing. It might be like measurements on a particular event or um, even in like the stock market, right? Seeing what has happened so far and then making a prediction or a projection or a model based on the data that you see. And essentially, with mathematics, you can see like you can create models that are very sort of broad or very detailed and very granular. And it's essentially um, you can sort of take into account how much each data point weighs on your model, right? There's like a weight on each data point.
Yeah.
Um, another another concept that can be useful actually in our values. It's sort of like depth, kind of, right? Like how much weight do I put on something?
Yeah.
Um, and so overfitting is essentially like uh, your model is like trying to take every single data point so seriously that the model has so many parameters. Now it fits your sort of like the set of data that you're looking at. It fits it really, really well. It was like sort of overfit to that, right? It's like
Mm.
if I took every single data point as like this is truth, I would have a model that fit every single data point perfectly, but it would be like a squiggly line,
Yeah.
as opposed to like a really general simple model that just sort of like goes on a basic trend. It
Uh,
doesn't, it maybe only hits one or two of the data points.
yeah.
It looks like the trend, but it doesn't match. The data is sort of mismatching from our model, right? The model is supposed to like sort of present the truth, but it's not on a case by case basis.
Yeah.
And so overfitting is something that like computer scientists, and when you're thinking about like machine learning, I won't say artificial intelligence, I will say machine learning. When you're talking about machine learning systems, you can actually overfit the data, and that becomes a problem for your machine learning algorithm that's trying to produce like useful predictions, essentially. And so I think as human beings, this is what we do.
Mm. Mm.
We overfit all the time. Every little piece of media or data that we take into our lives, we place a really high weight on it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
every little story that we see, it's like one person overfits to that story. And because of like mass media technology, it's like all of a sudden this becomes a story. And then everybody's saying, like, this is like the truest and most important thing ever. And we're like constantly this way and that way and this way with these opinions and this side and this problem and this issue and this like bad thing that's happening. And it's like everything is overfit, or like this is what we should be doing now. It's like we're all constantly like overfitting
That's actually
all of the things
really
that we
interesting.
experience. And so what we get is like um really flexible model, but
Yeah.
it's not really consistent. It's not really useful. It's so complicated. I'm always reminded of this thing called the Drake equation.
Yeah.
Do you know what the Drake equation is? It's
Yeah,
like
I do.
it's a computation of like how likely is it? I think it's like how likely is it that aliens are out there, or like other living species or something like that.
Yeah, with the
It,
number of
it,
galaxies and stuff.
it has a bunch of terms that like somebody just came up with. Drake, I can't remember, not Sir Francis Drake, but like somebody Drake.
Yeah.
Where it's like this amount of this times this should mean this likelihood, and then you add another term, and it's like, but also there's these many of these galaxies with these stars in this particular system, and I don't know all of the terms. All I remember is there's like all of these different terms, and to me, this is like a very like overfitted model, because it's like trying to take so many things into account that the model becomes like not really generally useful.
No, and a lot of assumptions.
And so I think that is also something that we should fear, even in what we have been talking about, which is like analyzing our values, is like we have to also beware that we could be overfitting, or like overweighting the data that we're taking in about our values. And we kind of just need to like step back and say, like, here's the general trend. That's, you
Yeah,
know,
that's actually a great. That's a great point. I think that's one of my major insights, but I haven't been able to word it like that. When years ago I did an ayahuasca session. That was like
mm,
a major thing where I was like, I am putting a lot of importance on things that don't deserve it. So
mm.
really, when I came out of that, is like all of the stress and all of these negativity things. It felt like they don't even deserve my attention. Um, but it didn't take away from the good. And I never really completely squared that because in a way I was like, oh, things don't matter as much. But it's like, no, you just over fit. You put too much attention on certain things and you put too little on others. And I think when you start to fit correctly, things start clicking for you. Um, and yeah,
And, and I think like when you have a good sense of like what fits and what doesn't fit, it's like you know that certain things are not going to fit, and that's okay too.
yeah,
Not everything has to like fit our perfect, model. Life is imperfect. Like
yeah,
we're not going to be able to control anything, and we shouldn't. We shouldn't have like a perfect, easy life anyway. I don't want to say we shouldn't, but like that's not the best case scenario
no,
either, right? To
no,
have everything fit our model. There's no like creativity then and flexibility and fun and like,
exactly.
you know, um, so like it's again, it's like it's okay that something doesn't fit my model perfectly. I don't need to go change my whole model just because something new came in and it didn't quite fit, you know. Otherwise we'd be sort of again like losing the identity of our model all the time. It would be like so flexible that it's just like I'm fitting every single point. This isn't really something that I can see a general trend of. I'm just following every little thing that enters my attention. And obviously our shiny black rectangles, they do that to us in a very well in a very intense way.
Yeah,
um, right, we take all of our little media into ourselves like very directly, and it's coming fast and furious,
yeah,
um, because we kind of subject ourselves to it,
yeah,
um, most part.
yeah, definitely. And I think, well, I had a clarity about it then that I don't have now clearly. And I think it reflects in the attention I give my little shiny rectangle. So it's actually a good, I think this conversation is good for me as a reflection for myself.
Really?
Um, yeah, because you were asking me at the start, you're trying to figure out my values and whatnot.
Ah, you're right.
Yeah, so I think my values are mostly doing pretty well, but the phone is an issue, and it's not
Me,
an issue that's like destroying my life in any way, but it's just like there's a suboptimality there that I'd love to get better.
me too. Me too. It's a tough one. It's so enticing. It's so enticing, and it does feel like, again, it's like at a certain level, it gives me comfort. Like
Yeah,
whatever way, which is a little bit scary that I sort of fell into that, and um, I am reminded of other times in my life where that wasn't the case, where I
yeah,
did the technology. I feel that I've been blessed with some opportunities in my life to explore a lifestyle that did remove me from that. And I will tell you, it was blessed. It was the most comfortable and content that I've ever been, without question. And I recognized it in the moment when I was living it, and I can recognize it afterwards too.
mm,
Um, the the time in my life where for an extended period of time I was living with, essentially like no central plumbing,
yeah,
no electricity, um I mean, no phone, no cell phone, obviously. um it was the most content, and I had the least to do in my day. It was like bringing back to what you said earlier, is like how many hours of the day did we work? It's like it didn't even really matter. We were
yeah,
just going about the day. And yeah, I didn't miss it, but for not right now in my life it seems so hard to sort of escape it almost.
yeah. But perhaps you shouldn't, right now, you're in that phase. You're bringing people into the world, and so in that sense, it's good to
Yeah.
to have a lot of things to do, and
Well,
it's the proper fitting. Go ahead.
I want to prepare them, like you said. What is the proper fitting? That's like a difficult question that I find as a parent,
Yeah,
beyond myself. It's like now I have to help my children be guided to into their own values or into our family values. Um, and it's not a clear, I don't see a clear path in today's world, or it seems it's a little bit confusing and chaotic
yeah,
for me to handle. Um, but I do think the movement towards like outside of yourself, outside of your shiny little rectangle, out into the larger picture, out into what's bigger than you, like I love the meme of like go touch grass. You know, that one I think is so applicable to us as a
Yeah,
species. All need to take that to heart is like, yo, just go touch grass right now.
yeah,
Like stop what you're doing and go touch grass.
yeah.
Um, like we need that more than ever, like to be taken to heart, I think. And
Hmm.
that's something I want for my kids.
Good.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, man.
Well, are you sensing
Yeah,
a,
I am. But I'm
a
I'm I'm thinking of something to help
okay.
as well. That, well, I think about goodness a lot, um, and I think that making sure things that I do serve goodness, or God for some. Not sure exactly what the distinction is, even though I asked David Schindler. But yeah, goodness. If what I'm doing is not serving goodness, then I'm serving something else. And I think there are things to serve. There are many things to serve, and people are serving all sorts of masters and mistresses, and so I think it's wise to serve the highest thing possible. Uh, and yeah, I do trust in the human capability to discern that. So yeah, that's what I would end with. So if you want to try to analyze your values, I think usually people know better than they admit to themselves that they do or that they think they do. Um, and it's actually quite simple. And then I think the depths to those values, maybe they're not as like muddy or murky type of thing. Like I think when we're talking about um, more complex values, or yeah, maybe I'm not completely fitting it in your frame, but this is the way I'm thinking about it right now in my head. When they're really entangled with a lot of different things, there might be a bit of a chaos to that. That's not exactly beautiful, but I think when it aligns, it's actually quite simple. Like, oh, I'm actually doing this. Well, what is the motivation? Trying to be good, like trying to spread love and trying to, and then that's often the most rewarding and the most simple and the most pure. So yeah,
Right. That's like a very simple trend, right? Like that would be a model that like might not fit all the data, but you see it's going in the right direction. You could just see that obviously,
yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely, man. It's been all over 2 hours, well over. I think it
It's
might
been a
be my longest one ever.
Well, let's stop while we're on a high note and we haven't totally gone off the rails. Um, we should talk again, maybe as an accountability mechanism, like that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah,
And we don't have to like talk about this the whole time, but
we'll
maybe
start off with that.
yeah, we'll say, hey, how did it go this last month? Like here we are again. Like,
Yeah,
did you did you find anything? What was the right depth? What did you look at?
yeah. I'm happy to lock it in for like a month from now. Would be cool.
We'll check in before then.
Sounds good. It's Thank you, Scott, for coming on today, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I'd love to do it again. And if people followed along, like congratulations. There's something else to worry about with these 2 hour ones. Like, I respect you if you did. Although
Well,
I
but
hope it it,
like
it means your values are okay.
But share in the comments. Like I love to engage in comments if anybody comments on this and they were inspired by like the values or like things that they've done in their lives. Like again, like I'm trying to learn practical things to do. If you're a parent, if you're not a parent, like whatever. Um, God, I would love to learn from the comments
Yeah,
that are on this. So,
absolutely. All right. I hope so.
all right,
Fingers crossed. See you, Scott.
bye.
Have a good one.